commissioned by the Board of Commissioners for what I'm calling Keep Effingham Beautiful account. If that's not the proper term, then I guess I'll find out here shortly. But that's what I've been calling it all along, so I'll keep on until corrected. We have with us this evening the accountant that provided and performed the audit for us, Mr. Donald Kane. Would you want to come and make an opening statement concerning your audit, and then we have some questions for you, sir.
Okay, first off, I'd just like to clarify it's not an audit. This is under terms of agreed upon procedures, which is significantly different in scope than what we call an audit. Just so every time you refer to audit, I refer to agreed upon procedures. Okay, so just so we got it clear,
That's fine.
Those are kind of technical terms, so I just want to kind of, it's important to note
The agreed upon procedure.
for the Keep Effingham Beautiful. We did, in accordance with our agreement, do this audit. We prepared a draft, which you had. The only change that would have happened is the actual report at the bottom of the report said sincerely. That got changed to say Rankin, Georgia, August 9th, 2013, because it shouldn't have said sincerely, because that's kind of a letter. This is a report. The agreed upon procedures were performed mostly by our accountant in our office whose education is in forensics and fraud, and it's Justin Garreau. He works out of Savannah, which also he had access to all of our information. We gave him a fresh set of eyes, so and he did work on the Effingham County audit, but he was not involved in this piece of it. So we got him to do most of this work because that is his area of specialty. I really don't know what you want me to say to start with. You have a draft of the report. If there's information that you would like to see in the report that's not there, then I'm more than happy. That's why it's in draft form for discussion. We can add the information, assuming we, of course, have it documented in our work papers, so we can go back and, if you want additional work done that's not, that you don't feel is included because it's not enough, we can perform some additional procedures as you would direct. I did receive a list of questions. I don't know how you want to do this. If you want me to go through the questions you gave me, or do you just want to ask questions?
Could you talk in? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. That better? I'm usually so loud, people tell me to hush.
You're going back in here now.
Okay. Anything I need to repeat? Okay. So I guess you just tell me what you want me to do and how you want to handle them.
All right. So it's my understanding what we have before us is a draft version of the agreed upon procedure.
Correct.
Okay. So
what you had was a report and the schedule of findings, and then you had a schedule of activity which was summarized. And we chose to summarize it the way we did rather than have every single transaction every day because we thought it was more meaningful. If you find that not meaningful, then we can change. I'm talking about the summary of disbursements and receipts that was in the last 6 or 7 pages in there. We can change that format to however how you want to see it. We thought this was more meaningful to show summaries of the vendors, not every single check, and summaries of the where funds came from, not every single transaction. If you want every single transaction, we can put it in a report. It just happens to be about 20 pages longer.
Well, I think I can speak for the whole board. If anybody disagrees with me, they're welcome to correct me. But I think what we're after is getting at the truth and the facts as to what happened with this account, what happened as pertained to the county's money that may have gone into this account, whether or not there's any actions that this board needs to take as a result of this, the findings of this, and if there was any improprieties or if there was anything that went on with the county's money that was not proper, how we can best put procedures and controls in place that doesn't happen again. And am I speaking correctly?
I think so. And my suggestion would be you've got a list of questions, and I have some questions. So probably the best thing for the format, if you just want to go through the questions provided, we can check off as we go.
Okay.
There's no need to ask them twice.
Can we get copies? I haven't seen anything else with this. Frank questions?
No, I just know that there
I
was
wrote
asked.
some questions and sent to Mr. Kane so that he wouldn't be blindsided and so that he would be able to bring facts and information with him. These are information that was given to me. Well, they're my questions, and they're also to try and answer some questions that has been presented to me by newspapers, by individuals, by citizens, by a number of people, and I've just taken and put it together.
I got some questions that I came up with myself.
So if I may, let me ask these questions so that I'm sure, and you answer them for me if that's okay with you. Then each of the commissioners can kind of, maybe they'll answer some of their questions, and if they have additional ones, we'll see if we can address those. How about that?
All right, so just to clarify, did anybody else send any questions to Mr. Keynes? Because I didn't.
I didn't
I think the only questions that he had sent to him was obviously the ones he's about to ask.
Well, if I may explain what happened, I was under the impression that I was informed that several of you guys had questions. I actually sent an email to Toss and copied the chairman. And the email basically said, if there were questions, it would be helpful if I knew what they were before I got here. So I don't want to stand up here and say, I don't know, or I'll get back to you. So I'd rather have the questions. And in response to that, I got some questions from the chairman, and which I didn't know where the source was. It appeared from the formatting in different places. They come from multiple sources, but I don't know where they came from. So I did my best based on our work papers to go through and answer the questions that hopefully provide. Actually, some of them were really good questions. To hopefully provide you with information related to some of the procedures performed, what the significance of some of the statements made were, and I could understand why that might be of concern. But anyway, General, so I tried to respond to these questions, hoping that we get most of this kind of aired out. So that's where they came from.
All right. So first off, am I correct that the name of the account is Keep Effingham Beautiful?
The name of the account is Keep Effingham Beautiful, Inc.
Inc. So that was the legal name of the account.
That's what's on the account.
Um,
It has its own federal ID number, which was
and you were
different.
able to determine the tax ID number?
Which
on
was
the
different
account?
than the county's.
It is not a county tax ID number. So is it fair to say this was not a county account?
Correct.
Okay. When was the account opened?
December 31st, 2007.
December?
31st, 2007.
And this isn't direct, but did you know from when you found the legal name and when it was through this other process, do you know when the Keep Effingham Beautiful Incorporation was set up?
According to Secretary of State's website, the entity was created on April the 11th of 2000.
Of 2000.
Right. It terminated, was administratively dissolved is the technical term, which basically means they didn't register. They didn't keep the registration current, and it was administratively dissolved on July the 9th of 2005.
2005. So in other words, that's important because the account was opened after it was
Correct.
administratively dissolved.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, if there were accounts prior to this, we have no records of it. We couldn't find any records
all right.
of anything.
Was the tax ID number that was provided to the bank the old tax ID number that had been dissolved?
I believe so, yes, correct. There's only one ID number that we know of. And if we do a search of this nonprofit entity with this tax ID number, its nonprofit status was revoked for failure to file the federal Form 990 for 3 consecutive years.
Okay.
And it doesn't, I don't know what day that was.
Did you determine who were the authorized signers on the account when the account was opened?
The authorized signers on the account were Connie Burns and Wanda Price, and those did not change.
They stayed the same.
They stayed the same.
Never any more added never taken
From
off.
information given to us by the bank.
When you say the information given to you, was that given to you by the bank?
Yes.
Okay. You stated in this draft of the agreed upon procedure. See, I'm learning on that.
You're good.
That Keep Effingham Beautiful was administratively dissolved. Did you, and you've already told me that you determined the officers. Now, were there other officers for that?
The listed officers on the Secretary of State website was a CEO, a CFO, and a secretary. The CEO was Connie Burns. The CFO was Thomas Kirkland. And the secretary was Danielle Valcourt.
I'm sorry,
Danielle Valcourt.
are any of those, there's two names there, I don't know who they are. Were they county employees, or do you know?
Don't know.
Does anybody here know?
Didn't go look.
Okay. So those officers, it looks like you didn't look at each year that it was filed, which is kind of a moot point.
Not
to me,
available.
because it was already dissolved.
It's not available. We could get the information.
Okay. And you stated in the agreed upon procedures that the account was open, and you just told me it was open December 31st, 2007, with a $1,000 payment from the Effingham County Board of Commissioners. What's the relevance of that statement?
What we were trying to do is establish, okay, where did the money come from? Basically, we're trying to get the money trail. Where did it come from? And it's important to know that initially, the Board of Commissioners funded Keep Effingham Beautiful under, and that's actually covered, I've covered it in this same question. It's funded under a contract or a grant and aid agreement during those time periods, which means they gave them $1,000 and they provided certain services to the county. And so that's where the $1,000 came from, and that's what this account was started with. It was one of these $1,000 payments.
So that's the same as like the commission at that time was funding like rape crisis centers and other.
Correct.
Okay. So the $1,000 was given by the board just
Under a contract,
under a contract.
with services to be provided to earn the $1,000.
Was there, were you ever able to determine, or did you try to determine if a contract was ever written?
We have copies, the only thing we could get our hands on was copies of contracts that were back in 04, 05, 06, 07, in that range. And so we have, actually it was just a couple of years. And it said services would be provided, but the copy we had the appendix attached to it that had the service that was to be provided. We believe the service to be provided was environmental education, which means they go into the schools and do environmental studies. And so the contracts we have are from 04 and 05, and then 03 and 04, 04, 05, in that range. So we don't even have anything for this 2007, at least not in our file. That's not to say it doesn't exist, that's to say we didn't have it at the time. I think some of this is covered a little later as well, but so there was an these deposits were supposed to be made under these grant and aid contracts, which then, as our opinion, because we didn't have any more copies, we didn't have those contracts. Eventually, then in 2009, I believe it was, is when the point was made we need a contract with these people. And that was another question that you had in a few, I guess we'll get to that when you get to that question. So initially, it was supposed to be under these grant and aid service agreements, where we were giving them $1,000 and they were supposed to be providing services to earn that $1,000.
Which was like old Effingham days and things like that. There was a group of them that were getting like $1,000 a year. I don't know if the Red Crisis Center was one of the groups that was getting $1,000. I think they might have been different, but there was a group that was getting $1,000 a year.
This was one of those that was getting $1,000 a year to provide certain services to the county.
And they were generally corporations, nonprofit corporations.
Yeah, that's what they should be, exactly.
Do you know where that $1,000 came from with the county, was it?
Now, we didn't go back and look to see back into this because we really didn't think it was relevant for what we were doing. I believe from memory, which you know isn't really good these days, that it was actually charged in sanitation budget. I'm not sure. Sanitation landfill budget, do you?
Different years, different ways.
And the only reason I'm asking is the same reason I told you in the beginning. You know, I've made up my mind already that this is a problem.
Mhm.
So how do you not let it happen again? That's
In the first years, Mr. Kessler, I believe that they were charged in Department 51 out of the general fund. In some of the subsequent years, it was charged in part through the sanitation, and it was done by invoice for specific things such as awards for environmental programs.
okay. And there's another reason, we'll get to that in just a minute. All right, you stated in this document that during the audit of the financial statements of Effingham County for the fiscal year ending June 30th, it was discovered that an individual who had been a county employee had been operating this account that we've just been talking about with no oversight, and that there were no effective internal controls over these activities, and that these activities were not being reported to the county commission. And here again, for the same reason, so I know best how this board can fix this problem. It sounds like if this wasn't a county account, how did we have controls over it?
Well, it was not a county account. The issue is the county monies were, it's an account that was operated by county employees. There should have been, if it was good, that's not necessarily itself bad, although I personally don't like it because then you get into the conflict of related parties and those kind of things. But it's operated by county employees on county time at county facility, which then leads to some of these other things that have happened. And so, as a county account, it would not fall under the county's internal control policies. As a non-county account, it wouldn't fall under the county's internal control policies and procedures. What does happen though is because now we're making payments to a non-entity, then we end up with a contract, which is when we get into the Republic Waste contract, that's making payments, and that's
To a non-entity.
to a non-entity. And then we have some other receipts that come in. There's some other things that were discussed in the report as well that came into this non-entity because it was able to be controlled by a county employee. That's the appearance of what's going on here. If nothing else had happened, if they just received a $1,000 contract payment from us, personally I wouldn't like that because it's a county employee operating non-profit entity, and this is on a regular basis providing a regular service. And it's county employee on county time, so then not only do you have the county funds going into it, now you have county labor going into it and all the other things that go with it. So you just have an issue from the appearance and the control prospect from the standpoint that this type of thing could possibly happen. And also considering there's a lot of factors go into it. The office is at a remote location. So it's just a lot of things that could go wrong did go wrong. Did that answer your question?
So about,
They have their own mailing address. Remember, we had that issue here not long ago.
They had a PO box and
Had a
it didn't
P.O. box.
close until I requested that in a public
Yeah.
meeting just a few months ago.
so what you were saying over this control bit, up to this time, you never started your audit, and Ms. Joanna Floyd, she didn't catch it either, so is that what you're saying? It was sort of it was an add-on, but it wasn't an add-on.
Well,
But it was to the fact that y'all didn't have any control over it, because you never had it in your audit, and she never said anything about it, even when there was money coming to the county at one time, and then it cut off. And you never showed that in your account.
Well, first off-
neither did Ms. Joanna.
okay, money Keep in mind how the process started and when it started back in 2007. When you're looking at the county side, where everything's running through the landfill or sanitation, where the numbers are fairly large, compared to running through the Keep Effingham Beautiful account where the numbers are fairly small. Over here, it looks like a large amount of money, but if you're looking at it in the millions of dollar budget and the revenues that come into the county, on the county side, you're not going to see that fluctuation like you're going to see over here. The fact that the account was actually, this is another question later, but we'll cover this now. The fact that the county, but this account was not in the county's name, was not in the county's ID number, was not in the county's banking institutions, it was a totally different bank. Generally speaking, we'd have no way of knowing it was there unless somebody told us.
So what you're saying is you weren't aware of the account?
Couldn't be aware of the account unless we just knew to go ask for it.
And neither was the finance department, other than that she knew we directed a check for $1,000 to an entity in which she was requesting a 1099 and was unable to obtain one, so she said no more $1,000 checks.
And then we went into the Republic Waste contract, which funded it to some degree. And so that money was going into that account as well, but it was not an Effingham County account.
And I have an issue with that contract because that contract was recommended to us. It did not go through the finance department for review. And by any way of reading that contract, a commissioner would have to assume that Keep Effingham Beautiful was a county account. He wouldn't know what it was.
Well, reading the contract, you wouldn't know what it was except to know that it was, there's something out there called Keep Effingham Beautiful.
But you wouldn't know it was not one of our accounts.
No, ma'am. And let me speak to a couple of questions by Mr. Loper. First of all, we did ascertain that we did not have a contract with that particular entity, and we had tried to go through and make a list of all of those. This was during a period of time in which we were also trying to clamp down on the fact that we did not have W-9s on people. And I think you will see in the series of emails in the very first package that was given to you back in March, that there was a series of emails where I, as finance director, did question the fact that we were issuing that check. Subsequent to that, we also made provisions that we would no longer issue checks to any entities except for the library and except for the health department. We precluded that by dissolving those issues out of Department 51. At that same point in time, all of our funds, as far as revenue funds, were being lumped into, as Mr. Kane says, into one GL account. So you had all the tipping fees going into that account. You had a lot of different revenue going into that account where you would not necessarily see the difference necessarily from just the recycling money. We have since that time, from about 2008 through 2009, added GL account codes for wine and beer and for a lot of our revenue where we might not necessarily see that somebody did or didn't pay us. We code those individually into those new GL account codes to help us look at that revenue to make sure that that revenue is coming in. But at that particular point in time, there was nothing set up to do that. No, sir.
So you could tell when it changed or it played out altogether?
Yes,
Well,
sir.
actually, from the time it started, from the time that it started, you wouldn't have even seen the change because at around the 2008 when those things were broken out, 2008, it's about the time the recycling fees started getting split.
But we have tried to make grounds on those sort of issues by implementing and establishing new GL codes for those independent type of revenues, so that we're getting wine and beer money in, or we're getting licensing money in, or we're getting in specific money that we can run a report, and that gives us a gauge from month to month and from year to year as to those revenues coming in or not. But that was not in place when I got here, and it was something that subsequently I started in about 2008.
Joanne,
Yes.
you never got these bank statements until when? You never actually handled this account, or had not, well, not knowledge, actually ever saw where you could even be involved with it until after?
No, sir. The first that I was aware that there was an actual bank account was in speaking to Ms. Price. And at that point, I notified the administrator that there was knowledge of an account being out there. As far as I knew, when we precluded issuing checks in 2009 because we could not get the proper paperwork, and subsequent to that, the board had made decisions not to issue checks as far as department agencies out of Department 51. That to me precluded that issue altogether. So until I understood from Ms. Price that there was an account, there was no knowledge of this outside activity.
So you weren't receiving any bank accounts?
No, sir.
They were not town bank?
All right, Mr. Keynes, I think from all of what I've just heard, it's fair that, is it a fair statement to say y'all were basically, you weren't out there looking for this account, you were following the money, and there was money going to this account?
You talked about this year during this current county audit.
Yeah.
Well, there are several things that we do during audits. One of we look at new contracts. Sometimes we look at old contracts if there's some significant changes. We do management inquiries. Do inquiries of, there's a lot of people around the county now, we do inquiries of people other than management, sometimes up to 10, 15 people, it just depends. This year's, and the question was asked, and here probably pretty close, where did we find this? Well, there was two things. You look at the reviewing of contracts, and the changes in the contracts, and management and some inquiries of management and others. And so then we started digging a little deeper. Okay, what does this Keep Effingham Beautiful account? And then it's about the time that and then we asked Joanna, and Joanna told us about this account over here, and we didn't know what was going in it. So then we started looking, and that's kind of where.
So you were following the money?
We're following the trail of the contract and answers to questions, and then we found the money actually.
All right. In that regard, another item in this agreed upon procedure is this return merchandise refunds that I've got a real question as to how this could happen. It looks like we paid a vendor $32,420 through the sanitation department's budget in some manner. And of that money that we paid, $13,320 came back from that vendor, and it wound up being deposited in the Keep Effingham Beautiful account.
That's correct.
And it sounds to me like this is a vendor that sells T-shirts, koozies, and promotional items.
Well, we have not said who the vendor is. We've intentionally left the
I
vendor's name
understand
out.
that.
Because I don't want to get into accusing anybody. So let's just say it's a vendor. And
Do we actually even have proof though that it was for items returned? I know that because I saw the documents that there was a memo in one check that said it was for returned items, but do we have any actual proof that that's what it was for?
And that's where I'm getting to. I mean, those type of items normally are not returnable. And you stated that on one particular check that was deposited, it said for returned merchandise, so.
that was what the check that we got, the check support for the deposit showed, was returned merchandise. So that's where we get it from. And we know who the vendor is, which really I don't want to say. We attempted several times to make contact with the vendor, almost did and failed. And so we couldn't find out what happened with from that force they would talk to us.
They just would not return your phone call, is that what you're saying?
I don't really want to say what happened.
All right, but it would be a fair statement to say that you have made this statement in this procedures document, and apparently it's a matter of concern to you as it is to me.
Well, because what happened was is the Board of Commissioners Sanitation Fund paid for some merchandise that was then, whether it was returned or not returned, whether we got a credit, whether whatever, from this vendor, and we had the check from the vendor was deposited into this account when this account didn't spend the money and should have not have gotten the funds.
Basically showing as a rebate that should have come back to the county but went.
Right.
Exactly.
But here again, what I'm about is trying to fix stuff so that
Understand.
it can't happen again. It's my understanding that we give department heads certain discretion as to how to spend their funds, and I'm addressing this to Ms. Joanna, and you know from looking. But how purchases, any purchases have to come through purchasing?
At that particular point in time, I think one of the things that we did not have in place is our P card,
Is what?
is the purchasing card that we currently use.
Okay,
The purchasing card that we currently use, we went into that for several different reasons. One, it allowed it to be paid at the time of the purchase. We do get a rebate off of it. It allows us to track things fairly well. But it also allows us, when there is an issue with the item, to dispute that item. And therefore, we can put it on dispute with the bank and show that perhaps we didn't get what we paid for. The additional piece of that is that if there is a credit to be issued, it's issued against that purchasing card, so it comes directly back to the county. I think that's one of the main pieces that we have in place now. As far as large purchases, generally those have to go through the purchasing agent along with the administrator. This particular purchase, or these purchases, I think at the time were a huge amount. The total of which I haven't seen this report, so I'm speaking out of turn, but from what I pulled in payments for that particular vendor, they were anywhere from $32,000 total.
this
And
report says $32,420.
I think the amounts ranged anywhere from $2 to
I don't remember.
somewhere between $2 and $5 grand, something in that
Per
area.
disbursement.
I think that was
Per
1 for 10.
disbursement.
It was 1 for 10.
Okay.
Okay,
But that really doesn't apply to what we're talking about, because we do have purchasing cards now,
Mhm.
and that is in accounts that we control.
That's correct.
The way the money was dispersed is really not the county's concern. What we should be concerned with is how the money got put in the account, how the funds were diverted, how Republic, based on some person possibly, saying, change the way you're depositing these accounts and give them a different account number.
Well, there was 3 or 4 different breakdowns that occurred in different places that I don't know should necessarily control the way from our position, for example, and correct either one of you if I'm wrong in this statement. But at the bank level, when the bank has a check made out to Effingham County Sanitation Department, they are not supposed to be able to deposit it in any other account except for Effingham County Sanitation Department. So if they take that check and they deposit it in Effingham County, keep Effingham beautiful, that's a problem even at the bank level.
That's
But
what
that
I'm
should,
saying. is
that
the
was one thing
focus-
that should have protected
The
us.
focus needs to be on how the money was put in this account, because the county, this is not a county account, because if it was a county account, I would say, why did you never reconcile it? You know, that kind of stuff.
And we
And
would have no
a
way.
purchasing card really wouldn't apply to this, not in this situation. We
It-
do have that in other entities now with purchasing card. This kind of thing can't happen.
And that's not
And
foolproof, because you're in on the vendor.
You just
But
asked
there is
about how to
a check.
prevent it, she mentioned how to prevent it.
I would say
If
that
we-
the
if
only
we keep
other
this
point-
up, we won't ever get through this.
The only other point I would make in answer to Mr. Kessler's question is that this would also pose as an inventory item. In other words, when you buy that much material, you would have had that much inventory. We do have inventory spot checks in place now, for instance, on recreation and all, that weren't in place then. So that if we buy this amount of huge, where it would not all go out and dissipate at one particular point in time, then we need to set within our purchasing policy that that's set up as an inventory item and checked on periodically.
All right, but this entity, or did Keep Effingham Beautiful ever have a purchasing card?
No, sir.
In county employees that were in control of this account have purchasing cards?
The county employees that were in charge of that account, the 2 that I know of did have county purchasing cards.
But not connected to this account.
That's correct, yes. sir.
Okay, but, and I asked that question because further in here, it's made mention of using a purchasing card. I think so.
It's probably a debit card, because the
Debit card,
if Keep Effingham Beautiful Inc. had a debit card.
debit card,
They had their own debit card, they made charges.
issued by the county?
No.
Okay.
In that name. In Connie's name and one in Wanda's name, except Wanda's, that's another story. Wanda's was actually locked in Connie's drawer, so Wanda never had it.
Okay.
So, but back to this real quick on this refund thing. And I'm not saying this happened, so please don't misconstrue that. I'm not saying anybody did anything intentionally. But if somebody chose to do what just happened here on an intentional basis, it's difficult to stop it. Because then you have collusion between employees and vendors. I'm not saying that happened here. I'm not saying that at all, which is why I'm particularly not mentioning vendor names, because I don't want to imply that in any way. But one of the things that needs to be is these departments should not have their own PO boxes. All mail should be central and dispersed out of this building here.
And we've already discussed that.
Okay.
in the
Part of
previous-
this, if that would happen, these checks, had they come through the normal process, would have come here and gotten most likely to the right place.
And that's one of the things that I've always questioned, is they were not supposed to have a PO box, so why did they have one?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I agree with you. No county entity should have a separate PO box. But this wasn't. This was a corporation, and they could have.
Okay.
Now, I know that they received donations from time to time
Sure.
from different entities, so certainly they were,
But if the
allowed to
vendor
have a
issued the check to the county sanitation department that went to this other PO box, and it actually got
And that's
issued
why
there.
I agree, I have a problem with that. How some of the vendors that we deal with, how without board direction of any kind, apparently, how that got moved over. But we don't have either of those folks here to answer that and how much of that was.
One thing that would help prevent this would be a notice sent to all vendors: do not change what checks are being made payable to without written approval from the chairman of the board.
That should be understood, but.
Well-
Sometimes you get to communicate.
All right,
Lots of issues.
this report, I mean, would you agree that it's obvious that there were funds diverted into an account that the county had no control over, that were supposed to be county funds?
I would agree that it appears that there were funds diverted into this account that belonged to the county,
Okay.
that should have been the county's money that were diverted into this account.
Part of those funds that were diverted, were they previously coming to the county in some way that was being reported, put on a line item or something of the county?
Which is what Joanna just discussed.
That's the way it sounds.
Yeah.
And then that revenue stream got cut in some manner, and it became a red flag that alerted finance to this? Or-
Actually, kind of, sort of, but not really. Now, if you think about when this all started, just coincidentally, I believe, is this started in like April of 2008, and that range is when the first deposit started coming into this account. I don't know what happened prior to 2008, because we have none of those records prior to that time. But, so that was in the early stages of the recycle program. So you wouldn't see fluctuations. You wouldn't see
It
massive
wasn't
cuts.
that much.
You wouldn't see massive cuts because it started that way. And it's just kind of always been that way. And it,
But then we had an instance in which several checks were held for several months, and then someone was contacted and said, void all those checks,
That
and
did
now they're
happen.
out to keep everything beautiful.
that did happen.
How could that happen?
How
How could a vendor, or how could, number one, those checks, if they were for that long, were stale dated?
But what happened was, and this is through an interview with one of your companies, it's not a vendor, but one of your,
I understand.
they recycled, wrote 2 checks, half to Keep Effingham Beautiful, half to Effingham County Sanitation or Effingham County Landfill. The Keep Effingham Beautiful got deposited. This is according to this third party in an interview with them. The checks made payable to the landfill or sanitation department were held. At a point in time, they were contacted again and asked to void all those checks and reissue them in the name of Keep Effingham Beautiful. And they were all deposited to Keep Effingham Beautiful.
And a company took it upon themselves to
They
take
did
it,
that.
and an employee's direction, no official from the county, to do that.
That's what was represented to us, the way it happened.
That's the way this sounds, and
With the company stating that they believe that it was represented to them that that was two different agencies of the county, and it was just put it in a different account.
okay.
That's why they didn't question it.
So with that, how much money are we talking about that was deposited that is Keep Effingham, or that is county money that was deposited to Keep Effingham beautiful?
I have that in It appears that at least $64,774.83 was improperly deposited in Keep Effingham Beautiful. That is the recycle money, the vendor refund, another thing.
All right, no.
And then there's potentially another $5,000 of cash deposits that we couldn't determine what it was because there was
But
no
with the vendor
record.
refund, the total amount was the 13,000.
Correct.
Checks and one check noted return merchandise. But we're just gonna assume that all of that was return merchandise?
Well, all of it was from the same vendor and came into this 13,000 came into to this account. So the 13,000, we believe. Now, keep in mind, documentation sketchy. Everything that we went to look for, there was no documentation for any disbursements. Everything, let's just say it was gone. And so we're just grabbing information for where we can find it to determine what supports this thing. Some of it comes from support for bank deposits, information we get from the bank, but the documentation that a normal county office would maintain was gone. Keep in mind, this was a separate entity, but we had no information. But we believe it appears at 64,000, almost 65,000 at least, potentially up to 70.
Was that account of $4,000 they got from the county?
No,
Did you
we
know?
consider that as you wanted to find legitimate. We would consider, but that doesn't include the 4,000 from the county. It doesn't include Republic Waste, because that was actually, I'm just saying, this is from recycling. I think I've got the number. This includes recycling.
But it does not include county employee time for driving the truck.
No, those were other issues that we had, was the county employees actually taking your vehicles and yours, subjecting you to liability, using your fuel, using your labor to haul some of this recycled material to whatever county they were taking it to.
And none of that's calculated in anything.
No. I have no way of actually being able to determine what that is. This is just cash money that came into this account.
You stated in this document that in May of 2009, County Administrator David Crawley was informed by email that the county did not have an agency agreement with Keep Effingham Beautiful. What's the significance of that statement?
Okay, what we were trying to do through this whole thing is determine who knew what, when they knew it, did they exercise any control, were they involved in any of the money. All this was back in May of 2009 when around the time we quit paying the $1,000 a month, that there was a timeline where we didn't have an agency agreement. And all this was to say that this establishes a timeline of who knew what when. This is just one of those, not saying anything was done intentionally, improperly, but just to state that this is the timeline, this is when it happened, and this was the response.
So you're saying here that there was an email sent that said we didn't have an agreement, but the administrator said an agreement. Is that by interview? It doesn't say.
We saw, okay, first off, from the emails we saw, email stated that we don't have an agreement. And honestly, I have to go back and look. The response was, we don't need an agreement because it's a department of the county. So there was, basically, it was the belief that it was a department of the county, when in fact it wasn't.
I think the answer was we don't need an agreement because it's under control of the county. Do you know what?
That was in the email. Yeah, we have.
That was an email?
That was an email.
You have the entire email?
I believe I have the entire email.
When in fact it was not under the control of
It was not under control of the county.
Okay.
But I think.
And in this case, it also was not placed blame
It
anywhere.
references to, we have control because we control the money that's deposited in the account.
Well, the reference was just that we don't need this agreement because it's the department of the county. That's what the reference in this was. It's controls the department of the county, so we don't need an agreement, when it really wasn't.
You might want to relook at that, make sure I'm not wrong with that.
You mentioned again in this document that, Wanda Price, who is still an employee of the county, contacted Patrice Crawley after finding a check card in her name in the desk of Ms. Burns. We've already talked about the check card, but that was the first time, to your knowledge, Ms. Price knew that there was a check card that existed in her name.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's our understanding from interviews with her.
And you further stated that Ms. Price said that she never saw another bank statement on the account after that date, when she was actually the only person left on the account as a signator after Ms. Burns passed away, correct?
Correct.
So what's the significance of that?
That's just, again, to
Somebody-
document who knew what when. That's not,
Okay.
it's just to
So
say,
somebody else started getting those bank statements.
it is our understanding that the bank statements, because
Did
it,
the county then stop that PO box and everything then started coming here?
no,
No.
no.
Okay.
The Wanda had the address changed. I believe this is the way it happened, and so that the actual bank statements were then sent to Patrice. When we asked for the information during our audit, the information and the bank statements came from Patrice.
Okay.
All that is saying is not, and as our understanding, Patrice was not a signature on the account. That's where the statements went. And all we're saying here is who knew what when. Not that there's, and I'll go ahead and tell you, I mean, you've probably already seen that there is no indication from the time that Connie Burns died to the time this account was closed that any disbursements were made inappropriately.
That amount,
Which was a relatively small number, that these disbursements dropped significantly.
And previous to Connie Burns' death, there's no indication that there was any disbursements made that was wrong either.
Well, let's
Because
clarify
again,
that,
let's-
you're saying the disbursements were made inappropriate.
This is a corporation.
Let's
not
just back up.
First off, $10,000 was still diverted to that account, which was taxpayer money into a public account. And then there were some purchases made that appear to be probably true purchases as far as maybe Office Depot or something that would have gone to county work, but who had the ability to approve that and have oversight of that.
Yep. There's a lot of issues prior to Connie's death, and and because there was no documentation for disbursements at all, we couldn't tell, is this, except for the fact that this vendor just absolutely does not make sense. I mean, we can't tell, is this a legitimate disbursement or not? We can tell from the time of Ms. Burns' death till now that the expenses were in accordance with the purpose of this entity. Whether or not this entity should have received funds or not is another question for this discussion. But prior to that time, I mean, there were some significant, unusual looking disbursements. And that's about all we can say about those disbursements because we don't know what they were for. In any event, I mean, we don't know if they were, we can assume and speculate because of who the vendors were and when they were in relation to some other documentation that we have. We can make speculation and deduce some things we think may have been inappropriate. In any event, anything that was spent above the Republic and the contributions were inappropriate disbursements because they were spending county money that should have been in this county.
No, well, I don't think so. I think it's a private corporation, much like my company. It would be interesting how county money is coming into my company, but how I spend that money, my corporation structure, the way it's set up, if I'm the one spending it, then it's my decision to spend it how I see fit. So that's why I keep saying about this, since it was a corporation, that I'm concerned with how the money got there, how it was diverted. But once it was there, some of these things that are unusual if it was a county account, but it's not a county account. And many of them question, and if I was on that board of that corporation, I would question some of these expenses.
Well, first off, there was no board and there was no corporation.
And I think first off, it's not a county account.
But it would be factual that your firm did not go through all of those expenses, did not go to the length to determine whether or not those were appropriate or inappropriate.
Well, we did some procedures to determine, for example, these expenditures in North Carolina coincided with a vacation trip in North Carolina. Even that doesn't say that they
That's
were
right.
inappropriate, that just says it's really unusual, given the vendors.
The bottom line, what matters towards the end, because Ms. Burns is not here with us, is that after what occurred after her passing and the $10,000 that continued to be diverted into that account, once anybody at Effingham County had knowledge of that, they needed to inform the Board of Commissioners so that we could put a stop to it.
Well, I would agree with that. The question is, who knew
Who knew?
which deposits were going in there and whether they, they knew the Republic was under contract. You would assume that that's okay, and there's some debate on that even. But did they or did they not know that we also had some recycle money going there? I don't know what they knew.
All right. So the money then that was taken, the account was subsequently closed.
Correct.
And the amount that was in the account was put back into the county's funds. And the county did that only through the authority of the signator, the only signature left alive at that time, which was Ms. Price. That's the only way the county could take that money.
Correct.
It would appear that of that money that was taken and deposited into the county's account, would you agree that there's, the county can say with all assurity that that was our money and the money that we took out of this private account belonged to us? Was that?
Let me think how to cushion his answer.
Okay. The money that we took,
I understand what you're
the only reason
asking.
the county got it was because there was a signature on that, happened to be a county employee, gave us the authority to do that.
Well, the authority I'm not so sure of, because if the signature on that account had not agreed to do that, the only way you'd have had authority, well, this is a legal question.
Okay.
I don't know that you actually had the authority to do that, to say,
Well,
I want you, in other words, without her signature, you couldn't do it.
But she did sign it, which
Correct.
gave us the authority to take those funds.
Because she stated that she thought the entire time it was our account to begin with.
Okay, so
Okay.
she basically, as a signature,
I
transferred
want
the
to be
funds.
sure the county's on good, solid ground for taking the
County
money.
has accepted it.
Was there not an email? Was
And
there
the
not an
money that
email?
we got back is ours.
My personal opinion is the money that's in that account should have not been deposited. A lot of that money should not have been deposited.
I
Deposited
understand.
there.
But it was,
But it was deposited there.
so.
Was there not an email that said something in regard to fast forward, this is what's happening today, that did explain that public money was going into a private account?
Yes, that is correct.
And
Let
what's
me,
the date of that email?
it's October 4th is when I notified the administrator.
What year?
October 4th of 2012, first week of October. Let me say this. I was with Ms. Price when those funds were moved. The reason why we went ahead and moved those funds was because from what I could tell, the deposits that were going in there for the last year and a half and that sum of money could be identified that those were county deposits. As such, I requested and asked her whether or not she felt like that those were also all county funds. Ms. Price felt the same way, that those were county funds. At that particular point in time, Ms. Price issued a check to the county for about $12,000, I think it was $12,817.20. And that was just based off of what we could identify that had gone into that account that were county-derived funds over that last year and a half. So I felt comfortable at that point with her moving those funds to the county.
Did she not take the position that she always believed it was a county account?
I don't know that she necessarily expressed that she believed it was always a county account to me personally. She believed that it was to do environmental things and that there was a division between the county's environmental program and this particular environmental program. I do not know that she ever knew the extent to which county deposits were being deposited into that account.
Did you do that on your own, or were you asked to do that, or you just took it upon yourself to do it, or what?
No, sir. At the time that I actually received this from the administrator, we sat and talked about the direction of this. I ascertained what funds were left in there, did some review of the information that had been given to me at that point, and asked the administrator about going ahead and moving those funds. It was a discussion with the administrator.
But we've determined it's not a county, wasn't a county account. I just wanted to be sure the county is standing on good, and you're not an attorney, you're an accountant, that we took funds and put into the county's bank accounts.
Well, I
that
think
we feel certain.
we didn't take.
What was the date?
We were given the funds,
Give me funds.
and we're on good ground to do
I
that.
look at it as we recovered our funds.
That's correct.
The only way you got that money from the bank is because we had an employee
Wanda gave it to you.
gave it
She
to.
wrote the check, and she was the signature on the account, so. okay.
Ms. Pratt, do you have the date that we recovered those funds, Joanne?
March
Yes.
2000.
That was actually done in answer to your question on March 14th, 2013.
Mr. Gaines, I have probably 3 more questions, and they may include or they won't. But my concern is, can you tell me presently, do we have, I'm trying to think of a good way to answer this, and you know where I'm going. Is there any present or past employees of this county who is now living that you feel like misappropriated funds?
It does not appear so.
Does not appear so. Do you feel from the, this procedure that you have done, that there is any other funds that may readily be available for recovery by this county?
That would be a legal determination.
That's a legal determination.
But I would ask, you don't know of any other account, anything else set up?
I
nothing
don't think
set
that's
up
what he was asking, but
in
no.
that name, in that you did name.
That's where I was going. If there's any other money out there that we might grab hold to. In preparing this audit, you told me that you had somebody in your office that's a forensic auditor, basically, that specializes in this.
His education is in his.
And they got this information through whatever means, a review of documents, interviews, whatever manner they could. And to the best of your knowledge, this is as true and factual information as we can get.
Yes.
I'm done. Y'all got something else?
I think one of the first questions is, what did we wind up spending on this? Where are we in cost to do this audit or agreed upon procedure?
Honestly, I'll email you the number. I have no clue.
Do you want it?
I'll email you. I'll tell you. I can email you the amount. I have no clue. The last time I looked was 4 weeks ago. It was like $5,300.
So less than 10,000?
I would hope so. Yeah.
I would too. Because honestly, there's not a lot in this. I'm glad that it's not a lot, because there's not a lot in this. It wasn't in the package that was given to me in executive session back in March or so.
I understand.
So it's
I'm not arguing- I wouldn't
really
argue.
a rewritten
I
version.
wouldn't argue that point at all. But you had to go look and see what was there. Or you chose to go look and see what was there.
Did, in your investigations or in your office investigations, did you find checks that was made to the Board of Commissioners alone deposited in the Keep Effingham Beautiful, or Board of Commissioners and an entity deposited in
I'll
that
look and
account?
see, I don't remember for sure.
To the sanitation department.
I mean, they were made paper, there were some made paper sanitation, but some of those were like held and then sent back.
But because what I'm really
I know you-
chase here is the what went there. You know, once it went there, I'm kind of the opinion that I don't like the way it was done, but I'm not really so interested in these 3 pages here of numbers. You know, it's interesting to look at, but I think what we need to focus on is how a corporation can be set up by any entity and have county money put into it without board taking a vote and making action
Oh, I
on
understand.
something like that. So that's what I think the focus needs to be on.
And whether those checks were possibly written directly to the Board of Commissioners and then deposited and that we may have some recourse back against the bank.
I'll look and see what information we have on that.
That would be an interesting thing for them.
There are instances of
Hmm?
that. There are.
I'm sure there are, I know there's a few to sanitation that were deposited to Keep Effingham Beautiful.
Well, my question is, since this is still in draft form, and you need to spell independent, correct?
I'm sure I do.
Is that something that maybe you could take information that you already have in your work papers and add to this?
Yeah, what I was gonna suggest is if there's something in there that you wanna see, something in here that's confusing that you want changed or
Well, personally, I'd like.
First off, this is not set in stone, that's
I'd
why
like
it's a
to
draft.
see these checks more in date order than in.
You want a detailed check and date order, that's not a problem. I would really like if you guys, if you either get together or email me independently, I don't care how you do it. Just shoot me an email and tell me what you'd like to see in this report, that you're a little confused or you're not clear. I have no problem with that.
Which is pretty clear here, is at the timeline of who had knowledge and who had,
That's right, that would help me with that.
who had knowledge of the account, and who had their hands on the bank statements, and who was.
This isn't one of those reports like a standard audit report. This is one of these where we kind of can freehand it. And our schedule of findings is, so in the schedule of findings piece, if there's something you'd like clarified there, just really shoot me an email. And if we can do it, unless it's just wrong, we'll fix it, we'll do what we can do, we'll shoot you another draft.
Well, would the board be comfortable in, if any board member has something they want clarified, shoot me that email and I'll compile it and send it to Mr. Gaines? Y'all good?
Just so you know, my timeline,
Yeah.
is I'm out of town for 10 days starting next Thursday.
Just so you know mine, I'm out of town for a while, starting tomorrow.
Okay.
You send it to me, I live in Atlanta, I get email. And I know yours. Do you have anything else to say? Anybody else from the board?
One other thing that I was thinking about is, I'm wondering about the recycling money that was coming to the county and then potentially redirected, possibly, probably. And, but it appears as though the amount in the recycling money that's coming in from scrap metal vendors would have went to zero. Because it was like there was an amount and then there was some and then it dropped to zero.
All the money did not go into this account. Now, for a period of time, some of all of it did. But then again, it did just vanish. And again, over in the general fund side, these numbers are minuscule compared to the total.
I know the amount is not, but if it's something that there is and then there's not.
But there wasn't, that was not the case. There was never, I'm not wrong on that. I mean, there's not where there wasn't and there wasn't and there was again. It didn't go away.
I would suggest draft that question
Yeah.
and send it to me and let me put that in there and you address that.
Okay.
Because I think you can address that better in the finished document.
Okay.
Okay? Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Kane, for your work. Shoot Mr. Mason an email, let him know how much your bill is, so he can know how lengthy a question's that. All right, I know the time is after 5 o'clock, but we're gonna take about a 10-minute recess. We're gonna start at 5:15.